The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 20th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Be seated, please. As marvelous as Easter Sunday is, with all the crowds and all the triumphant celebration of music and so forth, the Sunday after Easter is always different, isn't it? This is a sobering time. And we too are confronted today in our text by the sobering reality of believing. How hard that can be sometimes. And thus, our spiritual lives are always, I think, being challenged, not so much by active persecution like the disciples faced, but rather simply by our own everyday life experiences, which I think are constantly testing the foundations of our faith. For many, doubt then becomes the end product of all this wondering and challenging. Life can be very hard. Faith and doubt are so often seen as opposite ends of the spectrum, when in reality I think they're more like two sides of a coin. There's always some doubting, even in the surest of believers, just as there's bound to be some faith, even in the surest of doubters. What do we do with that? Well, I believe that Jesus invites us today not to focus on so much of our doubts or our beliefs, but rather to simply lean on him. I think that's all he's ever asked us to do, is to lean on him. That's what this text is about today. The Easter event begins with a very narrow focus. We know that last week we had the empty tomb. There were a few people who witnessed that empty tomb, told others. The disciples then get together in a small group. But then we hear the text today where it narrows down to Thomas and his confession, which in many ways is our collective confession as well. And I think Thomas, if you think about it, serves a very important function here. He graphically has this way of connecting both the crucifixion and the resurrection. We know that Jesus died this horrible death, and for them that just seemed to be the end of things. It was all over. But then soon after, the disciples have this amazing, surprising, unexpected encounter. And again, they keep asking, even after it happened, is this our master? Is this the same one who was crucified? Thomas, again, predictably seeks proof that this truly was Jesus, and you can't blame him. But only the bodily wounds of his suffering and death are going to suffice for Thomas, because only by touching himself is he going to be convinced that this ultimately is Jesus, ultimately his Lord and God. Sometimes we forget as we hear this story to look at what John says at the end of this chapter. He says that these are included, not all the stories about Jesus, but these are included. Why? So that you might have faith, and that by having faith and by believing, you too might have life in his name. I think it's interesting to step back and look at some of the ways in which we tend to disagree over certain things in our community of faith. As someone who's grown up in the church my whole life, I've listened to countless arguments over which style of worship is best. You know what that's like. Countless arguments over different doctrines of belief and faith. And of particular concern to a lot of people, I think, maybe not us as Lutherans, but for a lot of people outside of our family faith, is this issue of how did you come to faith? The when, where, and how, and so forth. Were you born into a community, or did you join later on, maybe as a teenager or as an adult? And perhaps they would ask, did you become a believer in an instant? And can you name that instant? Have you had some kind of direct, ongoing experience of God? See, those are larger questions which a lot of people think have to be answered. Some recognize Jesus simply in the fellowship of believers. And that's what we're seeing in our text today with the disciples. Here they were not sure what to believe any longer. They were terribly confused. Doubt is kind of an understatement, really. But they were gathered in pain and fear, huddled in this locked room. Not just any room, a locked room. And yet Jesus miraculously, we hear, greets them in their fellowship. Not one by one, mind you, but together. And I think that's the way it is for many of us as we come to faith. Perhaps many of us were born into a fellowship of believers, and maybe we've never left. Maybe we've always gone to some church where Sunday morning has been a part of our life and our practice. Many have always known the church, I think, always participated in a life of worship, fellowship, service. Many of us can say that's been our pattern, but many have not. And so others sometimes come to faith through what they would say was some kind of direct encounter, some kind of spiritual experience with God, and those are so powerful as well. And maybe some of us here have had a particular moment of crisis. We weren't strong in faith up to that point, but then as we called out to God in prayer, suddenly, and without any explanation, all of a sudden we knew. We could feel the presence of God, and at that point, our doubts were behind us. We believed. Each of us come to faith in a variety of ways, but we move now beyond the question of how we came to faith to where do we go from faith? This is really the pressing question behind the events of this text today. You remember that Jesus moved his disciples in that direction almost immediately. He shows up in front of them. He utters these words, "Peace be with you." How's it going? How you been? No, none of that. He says immediately, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." He gets right down to business. What a quick turn of events. "Rejoice, he is risen," we respond together. But now Jesus would say to our response, "Whom do you serve in my name?" In the joy of the resurrection, to whom does Jesus send each of us? That's the whole point of this text today. And if our believing, our confessing, all of our celebration, last week, this week, any given Sunday, if any of it is to have any substance and meaning, it always comes, always, as we are sent forth by Christ, as we enter into these all-important relationships with those to whom we are sent. When Thomas was not with the other disciples on that occasion, you notice that Jesus doesn't get all worried about it. He's really calm. He doesn't panic and say, "Where's Thomas? I got to find him and convince him." There's none of that. He knew that Thomas would come to faith in Thomas's own way because he knew Thomas. He understood him. He appreciated how he was different. And I think he understood that only when Thomas linked up again with the old gang, as he was a part of this powerful belief system which happens in community, that only then would Thomas believe. And I think that's the significance also of touch in this story. At least it was for Thomas. Touch may not mean physical contact for many of us, although it might. But how often have you said you were touched by a musical performance, or by someone's words, or even a simple act of compassion? Thomas came up close, not only to touch, but to be touched. Today we again find ourselves identifying with faith and doubt, that mix that we deal with on a regular basis every day, quite unsure of how to attain a good balance. And we wonder, like the disciples, can we live with these uncertainties? Even though we profess certain things, doubt never leaves. And how do we live with that doubt? And so our gospel today gives a powerful affirmation of the importance of being in relationship in life, of being the church together to support one another through all the ups and downs, the times of great faith, as well as the times of great insecurity and doubt. Life is not a choice we make between believing and unbelieving, but it's much more, I think, of a dance. A dance where God is our partner. And at different times in the dance, our unbelief ends up leading, and God has to take the back seat. But like Jesus, God's okay with that. And there are times then when, of course, God takes the lead, and we're greatly assured, and our doubt and our faith and our unfaith, for the time being at least, is back here, and that's all right as well. The goal, of course, is not to struggle with how we're doing. Are we doing enough of this, enough of that? No, the goal rather is simply to be a part of the dance. Even when we feel like we're losing a step, skipping a beat, even falling down, which is my most common behavior. We trust that God is somehow, has our dance partner, going to compensate for our shortcomings, even when we dance on God's feet. And so the good news this Easter is that even when we fail miserably to trust in Jesus, we know that Jesus never fails to believe in us. Welcome to the dance. Let us pray. Lord, you know there is not a single person here who has the kind of faith we need to earn our salvation. But yet, Lord, you love us. And yet, Lord, you dance with us. Thank you, Lord, for carrying us, guiding us, lifting us from our fallen state continuously, always assuring us of your unending love and grace. Lord, help us to simply trust again today that you are always with us, that your grace and love and forgiveness are always for us, and that you are sending us, Lord, into the world to proclaim that important message of grace and forgiveness to others. Carry us in the dance as we too look up and see you. In your name we pray. Amen.